Hello, everybody, and welcome to podcast number 3, airing live on April 7th, 2015. Today's episode is on displaying Pods data in WordPress themes. Our podcasts are regularly scheduled on the first and third Tuesday of every month at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. UTC. Go ahead with the music, Mr. Scott.
So I just figured I'd just play something real quick. I like to do this every podcast or so, and it's something related to displaying, sort of doing theming and things. Sometimes you find yourself stuck in the middle of a quite a big problem. Well, I don't know why I came here tonight. I got the feeling that something ain't right. I'm so scared in case I fall off my chair, and I'm wondering how I get down the stairs. Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you.
Love it. All right, guys. We have with us, welcome to our third podcast from the Pods Framework team, and we have with us today Scott Kingsley Clark, our lead developer and musician for Pods, and also a senior web engineer at 10up. We also have with us Josh Pollock, community manager and developer at Pods, and also owner of Caldera WP. And we have Jim True, support lead and project manager at Pods Framework. As always, you can call in to submit your questions via Twitter or Slack. We'll be taking live questions throughout the podcast. You have two ways. You can either join our Slack at pods.io/chat and then ask in the podcast channel, or you can tweet us at Pods Framework. And Josh, go ahead and take it away and tell us what we're going to be talking about today.
Okay. I seem to have a cat attached to me. So.
Oh, how wonderful. Is that an alien? Is that like a face hugger?
Something like that. This is much more adorable. So, what are we talking about today? We're talking about themes. There are a lot of ways that you can make your custom fields, no matter what custom content type your pod is, show up in the front end. We have a lot of those. The basic problem that we're addressing here is that every WordPress theme is pretty much built to show post title, post author, post content, and it's unaware of all these themes, all these extra fields that you've added with pods. So we're going to talk about one of the ways, but to handle this. And I just wanted to, before we dive too far into that, which is working in your theme, or more intelligently, your child theme, to go over briefly, and then we won't discuss them until future episodes, other options. So we have Pods templates, which allows you to work from the admin, and then there are various ways of outputting them, including the Pods Frontier Auto Template plugin. We have Pods pages, which are very useful when you're working with advanced content types, which we will address briefly today. And you can also use one of our plugins that we have, such as the Auto Templates, such as Frontier, to make your life easier. But what we're going to talk about today is, which I think is a good option for people who are used to working with WordPress themes. A lot of people are going to say, what's the right way to do this? What's the best way to do it? And it depends on the project, and it depends on your skills, what you're comfortable with. We're talking about today assumes a basic understanding of PHP that you would have from experience using WordPress to create themes. And so we're going to go through the various ways that you can use WordPress's template hierarchy to benefit you when you work with pods, custom post types, custom content, custom taxonomies, you're modifying, you're extending users. And we can touch briefly on advanced content types, but this gets a little trickier because WordPress isn't aware of these. And we'll talk about the different ways that you can get this data out into your theme. We're going to say theme, but as always, as good WordPress developers, we're going to remind you that we really mean child theme. Unless you're starting from scratch in a theme in your project, you really should be using a child theme instead of modifying the theme that you've downloaded. That way, you can still benefit from updates in there. In your theme. So, Jim?
Oh, yeah, I was actually just going to say, one thing that we can actually kind of bring to their mind, too, is to realize that when you're troubleshooting Pods and you're wanting to make sure that Pods is actually installed correctly and working correctly, we often tell you guys to actually go to the default theme like one of the 2012 or 2013, 14, or 15, because it gets everything else out of the way so that you can actually focus on just pods and a good, well-written theme.
Yep. So everything we're discussing, it's really theme independent. Most themes work. I mean, obviously there's some frameworks that add additional layers on top of the template hierarchy, but most themes use the default WordPress template hierarchy. And I wanted to start with that. We've got to be careful because we could do a whole hour on that. And honestly, this is the sort of thing that we think about a lot is how to work custom post types and custom taxonomies into the WordPress template hierarchy. So if that's an hour that people want to see, let us know in the PodsCast channel of our Slack, and we'll consider it for future or any other ideas you have for future podcasts. But the important thing to understand is that pods that are custom post type pods or custom taxonomy pods, pods is just is working with something that WordPress already does. It's giving you a user interface for registering these, and then it's giving you a user interface for the fields and additional ways of working with the fields. But a pod's custom post type or a pod's custom taxonomy is no different than any other custom post type or custom taxonomy. If you're using the table storage component, it is going to be different, and we're going to address that in a little bit. For the time being, let's just assume that we're not. It's using the default tables that WordPress gives you. And this is important to consider because this means that A, everything that you can learn about the template hierarchy in WordPress applies to how you're using pods. And also, we're happy to help you, but also if you phrase your question elsewhere, hey, I'm working with a custom post type and I need to know this, there's a whole world of WordPress resources available. Jim, do you have the link for the template hierarchy?
Yeah, the one from WordPress?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the WP hierarchy chart.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, so this is...
Oh, wrong one.
Well, that's a good one.
There we go, that one. That one there.
Right, so this is a great chart that Rami and Michelle made that explains the whole WordPress template hierarchy. And it tells you which file in your theme is going to be used to display content. It always comes back to index.php. A WordPress theme really just needs style.css, index.php, and functions.php. That would work, but WordPress gives you this whole system of if I have a single.php, that'll show for single post types views. But if, let's say, I have a custom post type called hats, it's going to show single-hats.php. It's going to look for single-hats.php. See if it has that file to show for a custom post type called hats. And if not, then it's going to look for single. Then it's going to look for index. Scott, if I get this wrong off the top of my head, I'm counting on you to correct me. There it is, Jim showing it now.
Sorry about that.
This is a really well done site, not just because it's pretty and it shows the whole thing, but those are links back to the codex. But you read this left to right. You start with what kind of content do I have? Am I on an archive? Am I on a single page, a single view? Singles get really weird because of pages, but for the most part, if we look, okay, I'm on a custom post type there, WordPress is going to say, okay, do I have single-post type, i.e., do I have single hats if the name of the post type is hats?
Oh,
and then, if necessary, Jim is demonstrating how easy it is to click into the codex and get the correct information you need. This is why I really love this chart. There are a bunch of these out there. So you read it left to right, and you'll notice there are these sort of fallbacks on the right here that are very generic. Archive.php for archive views, single.php for single views, and then if you scroll to the whole way to the right, Jim, you're going to see at the end of the day they all fall back to index.php. If your theme doesn't have an index.php, it will fail validation, and WordPress will not accept it. So it's always there.
So for this one then, for clarification, everything at the right is going to be like the files that are usually there, but if it's basically index.php has to be there, and then archive single, and then you start moving left to being more specific.
Right. You read this chart left to right.
Okay.
In the sense of, if you think about this is it's actually very simple when you look in the source code.
Mm-hmm.
This whole system I mean, obviously, it requires that like WP Query does all of its magic to populate the conditionals and say if it's an archive and these sorts of things. But the actual code is super simple. It's very tight and compact.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a set of conditionals that's moving. You can read it left or right. Am I on an archive page? Yes. Am I on a tag archive? Am I on a post type archive?
Right. Okay.
And then, does this file exist? If not, move right.
Oh, okay. So like if my custom post type is books, I would go to like archive. Do I have an archive-books.php? If not, then I'm going to show archive.php.
If you have archive.php.
Right. And if I don't have
archive.php,
archive.php, then I would be showing index.php.
yes.
Okay, got it.
And so
It's pretty straightforward. Yeah.
the whole system, it gets kind of complicated because there are sort of special post types like attachments and pages that have special rules.
Yep. Way down
And
there.
category and tags are special hierarchy or special taxonomies that have special rules.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, because you've got like the taxonomy. It's not just the taxonomy. You can also do like the taxonomy term and stuff like that.
right,
Gotcha.
and you can even do some of those. You can do by ID.
Yeah, I see that. Like
There,
category ID.
Bug, category ID, category.
Okay, gotcha.
Um,
So yes, we could spend an entire hour on this very easily, but we're not going to do that today.
Yeah. But the idea is to understand, and I've written a series of blog posts on my own site, joshpress.net,
I'm going to show them that link
where
now.
I went through almost every one of these cases. I really should just put this up as an ebook. I have to get Jim to edit it though. Where I go through every sort of case, every little piece of that, and discuss both what's used, what's the hierarchy, and what are the conditional tags that WordPress gives us. That's the other really important piece of the puzzle, is that you might not need to use if your post type is called hats, a single hyphen hats. You might be able to use single.php and just say if post type get post type is the conditional tag there equals hats, then do this, right? Or if you need a wholesale change, then you want to do a single hyphen hats. And let's talk about so we're talking here. We've talked so far about what file am I using. Let's talk about what we're doing in those files. And let's stick to just post types for now. We're going to go beyond post types because Pods doesn't just let you create custom post types. But let's stick to custom post types that use meta storage to start with.
Okay.
And you have two general strategies for showing your custom fields. We have the Pods class that works directly with the Pods API. And in the beginning of Pods, there was only what we now call an advanced content type. These are pods that don't use WordPress's standard storage tables. It uses its own storage table. And as a result, WP Query, WordPress's standard API for posts, doesn't work, right? For those types of pods, which in Pods 1x, those were the only type of pods. So in Pods 2x, continuing on to what will become Pods 3, you have the Pods class that can access standard custom post type pods, as well as all types of pods. So when your question is, how am I going to show custom post type, my custom fields for my custom post type pods, you have really two options available to you. You have the Pods class, which is our API, and then you have WP Query. You have GetPostMeta to show an individual field, right? So we could use WP Query to get a very specific set of posts, right? I want to get all. You could do a meta query in there, so we can say I want to get all posts that are in my pod called hats and my pod called shoes, where the custom field size equals large. And we showed this in our first podcast using find, but we also did get into those meta queries, and they use exactly the same syntax as WP Query. Also, remember that WP Query, the WordPress loop, is a bunch of helper function wrapped around WP Query. Right, so we were used to looking in the loop, we're used to saying if have posts, that's an alias of the method in the WP Query class, query have post, right? So for most types of, I've created a custom post type, and I've added a bunch of pods fields. GetPostMeta is really all you would need. If you're inside the loop, and by inside the loop, I mean inside of WordPress's loop, you can say GetPostMeta. The first argument of GetPostMeta is going to be the ID, and then you can use the function getTheID to get postmeta for that. And then that could be all you need because that would give you a giant array of all the post meta. And then you can work through that using PHP. Or you can get an individual field, right? You have a field called size. So get postmeta, get the ID, comma, and then in parentheses, in quotes, size. And now you have the field for size.
Josh, this might actually be easier for them to kind of see it. Scott,
Yes.
are you actually ready to maybe like do a quick little demo of like having a pod and a thing, viewing that page within like a standard WordPress theme, and then just going straight into the code?
Oh, look, he's got his IDE ready, doesn't he?
Of course he does, because he's amazing.
I do have my code up. I don't have a site
Right,
or
but
demo
can
site.
we go through what I was just talking about? You can sort of type it out as we go.
Sure.
So the idea is that we can put all of the posts. Let's just assume we're inside of the loop, okay? Oh, Scott's gonna take us inside the loop.
We're inside the loop.
Oh my
So-
heaven! Dun 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 dun.
Can we keep Scott's screen up?
Yeah, I think it is on. It is up. Oh,
Okay.
Sorry, it was up. There we
I
go.
questioned that. I can't see his screen.
You, he should be the main one.
Who knows? So basically, if you look here, this is 2015. Right under, right there in 44, we see get template part content. That's going to show just the main post content for it. But right under there, we could potentially show a custom field. So let's say again that we have a custom field called size. Right, so he's going to open up some HTML there, and then he's going to do PHP, and he's going to do size equals get post meta. He's inside the loop, so he can just say get the ID to get the ID of that post, and then a custom field called size. And that last argument is going to, in most cases, cause it to return as a string, we hope. And then he can just do like echo size.
Always good to consider escaping when you're echoing anything from the database from user-provided content. But in this case, yeah, I'm pulling it from a size meta field that was added to a pod, for instance, and I'm just echoing it. In this case, I'm escaping all the HTML just in case there is some unsavory stuff in there and we're not expecting HTML. Maybe we're just expecting t-shirt size, like small or large, or maybe in a case of dimensions, maybe it's 10 by 11. So we're not looking for HTML tags to be output, so we're just going to protect it just in case.
Great. So that can be as simple as it is. That's a simple text field. And this actually really, at this point, we don't have to be talking about pods. We're using established standards, so this could be the case of any custom field that's added via another custom fields plugin or just the custom fields UI in WordPress, or something that your plugin automatically adds. Scott's going to get extra fancy with his markup. Because let's add another field. Let's say that had been a relationship field that was related to another post type. In which case, we can't just echo the value of that field because that's going to echo an array. Right? If you have a related post type, right, you have a field that's related to another one. So this was hats, and then it's related to like colors or teams, right? If we're selling like it's a site for sports teams hats, right? So we have hats and we tag them like Florida Marlins, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Well, I just got way local there. Miami Dolphins. this is going to get tricky because what's going to be returned here on related post is not going to be a string that we can just echo right away. It's going to give us an array of information. And it's very helpful in your debugger to look and see what's in that array. And what Scott's showing you here is we're assuming that this is a single relationship. There can only be one. This is a Highlander situation. So we're able to just right away take related post. That's going to give us the ID, and then we can get the title of it, standard WordPress thing. So Scott's now moving into, we have multiple posts that are related, so we have to do a for each loop because the array that's going to be returned is going to have a hunk of data about the first post and a hunk of data about the second post and a hunk of data about the third post. So what we have to do is this for each loop, for each related posts as related post. And then inside we can do get the title related post. And we can also get the custom fields of that related post. Because GetPostMeta just takes an ID. So we can get any of the custom fields of that related post once we have its ID. And I have an entire, Jim, can you link to that article I wrote about working with related fields?
Sure.
Because I wrote out a lot of examples there and how this works. And
it's a long URL, but we're actually going to include this in the show notes when we're done
great.
with the podcast.
But it shows us how we can go from this related post array, which is going to give us like the post fields, the ID, the post, the title, that we can use once we have the ID to show custom fields of the other one we can traverse through. So the other thing that we could do before we move on from posts to consider is that right now we've been assuming that you want to show all of this in the, when I see this, when WordPress automatically gives me the view of this post, I want to add custom fields. That doesn't always have to be the case. Remember that we still have WP query, and I don't want to go too far. Oh, Scott just did something really important, which is that to make sure that this stuff only shows. Scroll back up, Scott.
Right, so in this template, we're in content.php in 2015 theme, and this is actually used in the archive loop as well as the singular post display. So it's probably important to denote if you want it to be in the singular or not.
Right. So sometimes it makes sense to say, show this only when we're on a single view, or show it only if we're in an archive view, if is archive. And sometimes it's fine. We don't need that. We want to show it on both, right? So now this is only going to show up on an archive view because Scott's changed it to is archive. And we could just skip that if we wanted it to show on both.
We actually had a question come across the PodsCast channel.
Excellent. Whoever asked that gets plus 10 points.
There we go. I'm going to give Kevin Price plus 10 points. If you're going to return an array of data, could you not just call size equals GetPostMeta post ID and only call the first parameter? Would that not reduce the number of database calls as opposed to calling each postmeta separately by using the second parameter?
Yeah, that's a great question. What he's asking is the idea of we have two fields and we're doing two questions. Doing two queries versus just getting all of the meta fields, like Scott's doing right now in 58. Scott, you know the answer to this question better than I do.
Yeah. So the secret sauce within WordPress, whenever you get any field out of the database, it gets all the fields, and it stores it in an array that it caches for reuse. So every time you do a call like this, size or another field related post, it stores that array based off the current post ID that you're referencing for the metas. So calling this all meta fields and then doing it off the array here like that, or for the related post, that won't be very much more performant than calling it with GetPostMeta. With the individual argument set. I think it's probably better to do this because then what you get out of it is unserialized things that you may want and it's just a lot, I think it's a lot cleaner for the API usage, because we can then track and say through additional inspections with IDEs or code reviews, someone can say, okay, they're getting this meta out of here, instead of trying to find out where this was set and trying to pinpoint everything else. So I think it's just a lot easier to read and easier for new users, intermediate users to be able to pick up from that.
So the point here is that there's an infinitesimally small to no advantage performance-wise, but it definitely makes it a lot more readable.
Right.
Like you're sacrificing code readability in terms of a performance gain that basically does.
Yeah.
What would be the difference here if you actually, instead of using the WordPress loop, if you actually use the Pods API instead?
Well, yeah, and that's, I think, that what I wanted to get to, but that was a great question. Well, the question of, do I make each GetPostMeta for each field versus do I just do it once and then work through that giant array? And the answer is that it doesn't make a huge difference, but it's more readable this way. So it makes it easier to figure out where things came from. So as I said, we've been looking at GetPostMeta, and GetPostMeta is super awesome. It's also the most portable way, right? If you remove pods and just manually register this post type that we've been talking about, when you remove pods, it doesn't actually remove any of the data. So GetPostMeta is still available to you. And that's an important point. All those fields are still there. So this is, in many cases, the most portable way of dealing with it. Your related fields aren't going to be there because Pods creates this bridge table. But for simple fields that don't involve relationships, it's still all there.
Well, I just wanted to clarify, your related fields are stored in the database even outside of our own relationship table. We use our relationship table to improve performance on lookups, especially for traversal purposes internally to pods, as well as through our API usage that people may be using. But if they wish to get at the actual data, it is stored in this meta key here, pods related post with underscore, and this stores a very basic array of IDs for each relationship field. And that way you don't actually lose any data whenever you stop using pods. You could just change out your meta keys to be using that. The reason for this is because we are hooking into this for whenever you call an actual field name of pods, and we hook into it and do a couple other things in the background so you can get more information quicker.
Kevin had another really good question, and I think it kind of goes to the concept of pulling it all at once or pulling it from the Pods API. His question was, you lose formatting when calling it all at once, right? How are we actually getting to the correct displayed version as opposed to the filled version with GetPostMeta?
I think the different it's just in the Pods class, we have display versus field, and display is a method that gives you a formatted version, whereas field gives you the raw version. And I think what Jim is asking here is how can you get to the formatted version using GetPostMeta?
Right.
And we might need to come slightly back to that, I think.
Okay.
Let's
maybe go through the field. Maybe go through field and display in the Pods API loop.
Let's talk about the first half of that, which is using the Pods API and comparing field versus display. And then let's back up into how we can do that with GetPostMeta. So Scott was just starting to show how we can get for the current post in the loop, get a pods object. And I like how he's done it because it's very modular. It's going to say use this pods function. We covered this in the first PodsCast on pods field, but we're going to use the function get post type to determine what the pod name is, and then get the ID for getting that ID of the current one, because we're inside of the WordPress loop. It's important to note that if the current post type isn't a pod, this is going to return false, correct, Scott?
Right, the pod doesn't exist, so it won't execute.
Right. So, but what's important about that is that you need to make sure that before you use that variable pod as if it's an object, you need to make sure that it's an object, right? Because our next step is generally going to be if pod's total is greater than 0. But you can't do pod's total unless pods is an object. And that's what Scott's doing there, is if empty pod, then pod doesn't exist. In that variable pods isn't an object, and we can't use it as an object. I think he was about to show the third argument of pods, the function. And this is the strict mode. And this is going to cause it to return false. But the key point here is that we always want to make sure, am I correct there? Yep, it'll return false instead of an empty object. And so what's useful about this is that we're able to test the value of this variable pods before we use it. And this is really important because we can potentially get a fatal error.
Yeah, I should clarify. By default, it will return false if you don't have anything in here. But if you do set this third argument to false, it will be an object fully qualified. So then you could do something like this, and then check to see if the pod itself exists. This is for more advanced usage, where you want to always get back an object and be able to reference things at the object level. Right.
I mean, it's just important because what I would do is actually just like a negative conditional, right? If it's not empty, then we can continue and put our overcode in there, right?
We had another question too about would this work for any CPT, the pods thing, and I'm guessing probably since it's not a pod, the pods object won't work on any CPT.
Exactly. That's what we're testing against.
Okay,
right?
Got it.
If we load this, let's say we have 2 custom post types. Our theme or Jetpack or something added a portfolio post type. We could extend that with pods, but without doing that, it is not a pod. So if this were our theme that we're using, let's say we have WooCommerce installed, so it adds a product post type. Unless we go into pods and make that product a pod by extending it, this template file that we're working with in 2015 is going to run on product, but product is not a pod. And therefore, that line on 51 is going to return empty. So we need this conditional that Scott's added on 53 will allow us to safely use methods of the pods class inside of it. Because we also have added another pod called teams, right? Like a custom post type that is a pod, right? And so we do want to use it in that case.
Got it.
And inside of there, once we get past that, it's very simple, and I don't want to get too redundant to the first PodsCast, the one on find, because we really cover this. But let's just look real quick to compare pods display and pods find to what we can do with GetPostMeta. Scott?
I was just replying into the pods chat. So what am I doing there?
Oh, I just wanted to do a quick comparison between pods find, pods display, and GetPostMeta.
Sure.
When we are inside of PodsLib.
Well, I think probably best way to start is, since we've been in the meta mode, we could just start with display and field, and then we'll go back up to the archive and show find versus WP query, stuff like that.
Yep.
So here's a core WordPress meta usage, GetPostMeta, but since we have a pods object, we can also do this. And what this does is basically the pods, like we set up here, it already knows it's a specific ID, and then we can do the display of that size field. This will theoretically equal the same as this. However, any field display, any field that's defined inside of pods has some additional options. So what display does is it just makes sure that some things are displayed correctly. So if it's a relationship field, this is a really good example here, we may just want to show the post title. And so in this case, I'm going to do display related post, and I'm just going to go ahead and echo this. And so what this would do is this would take care of the whole get title. We don't have to do that. We just display, and it will automatically output the post title. One quick and easy thing. And also, if I were to reference a field off of this, like another field, I could easily do it like this. Say field equals post. And this is we have traversal available to us for fields that are relationships. So you can pull fields off of a related post, pull off a field off of that. So like say another field perhaps is another relationship field. So you can do something like this. So related post dot another field dot. Let's say we want to just get the post name. Maybe it's another relationship to another post type. So that could let you do some more complicated things.
Right, and so I guess what we're showing here is that you could do everything that GetPostMeta does, and you could also do more things. Which one do you choose? Well, do you need that extra power because there's a little bit more overhead there? But if it's worth it to you, definitely. And then the other thing is that we have table storage pods where your custom fields go into a custom table instead of going into the regular post meta table that WordPress provides, in which case GetPostMeta is no longer of use to you.
Well, and we probably should clarify, since you're using a pod and we're hooking into the metadata API, you can actually reference fields off of a custom table built for a pod. So if you've got a pod called book, it's a table storage for its custom fields, then you could still reference all the fields off of GetPostMeta. It'll work perfectly exactly the same way because we are hooking into that function.
Whoa, hold on. I just learned something. I'm so glad I tuned into the Pods'cast this week.
Okay. I like to think of every time I open my mouth to talk about something within pods, at least one of our team members, their heart and mind grows at least an inch.
Okay, Mr. Grinch. All right, speaking of Grinch, Mel now might actually be able to talk about Friends of Pods.
Turns out that it could. Yes, you really could help pods grow. Should we do a pledge break, Jim?
I think it actually is. We're talking about Grinch, and making our hearts grow. Why not?
Right. So we do want to do a quick pledge break. We launched Friends of Pods about a week and a half ago, and this is our way that we connect you with some partners that give you some really cool gifts to thank you for supporting us. If you can pledge to do a monthly donation, we have lots of levels. We understand that everybody has a different income base. Can you give us $5 a month, $25 a month? Whatever it is, we have different premiums. At the higher levels, you can get some stickers, some T-shirts, and it's our way of we'd really like to make pods more responsive to our everyday users. We'd like more of our funding to come from our everyday users because we want to serve you better and make sure that Pods continues to grow, that we can focus on things like improving our website, Pods 3.0, new add-on plugins, making sure that support stays free. And so that's all I'm going to say, but it means a lot to us, everybody who's already signed up, which is a bunch of you, and we really appreciate it. You're all listed there, and if your name's on that page, I thank you dearly. It means a lot. Let's get back to the Pods'cast, but please, I beg you to check
I did
that
want
out.
to add one more thing.
Sure. You're the boss.
To put it in perspective, when you go to our GitHub and you look at the issues section, you'll notice our issues number is really high, and it may confuse you because you may think, oh, there's lots of bugs, when in fact most of those issues are features, enhancements, requests from our team and from other people out there on the web. So lots of people have ideas, and we have ideas of where we want to take pods. And but to put it in perspective, you can see the issue count is quite high. It's, what is it, 700 something?
709, yep.
Yeah, so that there is a long way for pods to go. We have so much more left to do before we're even 100% feature complete to what we want to do, and that includes Pods Core, enabling Pods Core to do more, so we can build more plugins that you can install and do more feature-focused things. So I mean, we've got so many things we want to do. Like for instance, I bet you've never seen a plugin that does relationships that handles deleting and adding and it's all sorts of things that cascades. It's very hard to envision something like that inside the WordPress ecosystem, but it exists elsewhere, and we'd love to bring those sort of things that are hyper-focused to WordPress towards the goal of making things more easy to do for more complex things. So we've got so many things, so many ideas. It's just crazy, and we always faced up against the reality that we only have a little bit of time every day to do what we want to do, and sometimes that focus for the team is trying to figure out if we can keep going. So we appreciate every friend, especially some of the upper ones that have been very generous very recently. You know, we've only been around for a week with this Friend of Pods program, and it's been pretty awesome response so far. I think last time I checked, we are probably the Friends of Pods that we have generated the donations from is already more in the last week than we have received in the past half a year. So, and that's now monthly. We're going to get that monthly, and that's a really awesome thing. So I want to also thank Jim and Josh here. They have spearheaded Friends of Pods, making it come out from Josh's idea of, hey, what if we do something like public radio does? And then Jim, who had some great design aesthetics tweaks, and he just took a lot of things out from nothing and made Josh's vision come to life. And then I just sort of said, hey, yeah, that looks good, or hey, that's a good idea. So really, it's those two that have made this happen, and that is highly reflective of our team dynamic. We are sort of owners of the future of pods, and we take that very seriously.
Awesome. We thank you, Scott. You're a great team leader.
Definitely.
On the theme of pods does a ton and it could do more. We're not going to. We've got about 18 minutes left, and we're not going to cover everything. Let's just accept that the pods is too big. We're going to have to continue. We're going to have to do a part 2 of this episode. Let's try and round out just post types. Kevin just asked another really good question.
Yes.
If we're using pods only to create custom post types, and there are native functions like GetPostMeta, do we need the pods class? And this is actually a common part. The second half of his question here, which is very common, is pods resource intensive, and does it really is it worth that to me? You know what I mean? Where is this line? We tell people all the time, hey, it sounds like there's another tool that's better for you. When is it that we should consider using the pods class versus GetPostMeta, WP Query? And if we are choosing GetPostMeta or WP Query, why is it that we are using pods? I think is a really good question for this type of discussion. As we've discussed, we started to show before we did our pledge break what some of the powers of the pods class, and I think also the other thing that we're not talking about today is the admin, right? That we in the admin, we don't just let you show say I'm going to have a field called size, right? Because you could just create, like, there's you don't need to register a custom field. Sorry, my dog's barking. In WordPress, it just exists by adding it. But when you add a field in pods, you're saying it is this type of field, and therefore you're getting additional validation, both on input and on output. So that way, if you say it's a number field, the UI is only going to let you put whatever format number that you've put in there. And then on output, it's going to be aware of that when you pass it through Pods display. For instance, if it's a currency field, right? You can add a custom field in WordPress called dollars, but in Pods, you can add a currency field and specify, is it dollars, is it euros? And then Pods API is aware of that both on saving and on output, that it needs to be formatted properly, and that it needs to have the if you use Pods display, it needs to put a $sign or a euro sign in front of it. Or we have a bunch of them. Like I remember somebody adding for Vietnamese currency at one point. There's a whole bunch of pounds, these sorts of things that are there. And that comes with, right, additional power comes with a little bit of an overhead. And again, it's one of those things you have to decide if it's worth it to you or not. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
That being the big difference.
Yep, Kevin said good point.
Yes. Kevin asked good questions. Can we give Kevin,
Yes, he
Kevin the
does.
Good Questions Award?
Yes.
What else can we show you in our last 5-10 minutes of podcast number 3, RE theming?
We get taxonomy questions a lot. Do we have enough time to maybe
Right,
show like
yeah.
an example of taxonomy?
Yeah, let's not jump into taxonomy displays, right? I'm in a single I'm looking at my taxonomy archive, but
Right.
let's look at the ways that you can work with your taxonomies for the current post that we're looking at in the context
Yeah.
that we've been in. And
Yeah.
let's keep in mind that there are now 2 different concepts of taxonomies, and I think this is one of the trickiest things. Again, Pod's power is that in WordPress, you can associate a taxonomy with one or more post types. By default, categories exist as a taxonomy, and it is associated with posts. If you want, you can associate it with pages or with custom post types. And it could be associated with, you can have a custom taxonomy that's associated with one or more post types. That's how WordPress works. And in the Pods UI, you can set up for your post types, you see a checkbox for every single custom taxonomy, every single taxonomy customer default that exists. Is it associated? Pods also lets you create a relationship to a taxonomy. That is a custom field, and that does not associate it with the taxonomy. And I'm being very careful with my terminology to be very specific and correct, that an association is what WordPress does, i.e. it is stored in the tables in your database that track term association, whereas a relationship means that it's just like any other relationship field. So it's tracked in the pods, whatever tables you're using to store it, as well as the relationship storage, the pods.rel table that handles those relationships that we talked about before. And as a result, that means that we have 2 different ways of getting at an associated taxonomy, i.e. this post that I'm currently seeing, what are the terms in this taxonomy that are associated? We can use the native WordPress functions, generally the best way of doing business, or we can use the pods class, though we still need to fix that bug in 2.5. And the, well, we fixed it, we haven't tested it. It should be in 2.5.2.
I was going to grab my fly swatter, but I didn't have one.
I know. I'm just saying the people watching like today should keep in mind that there's some weird issues in 2.5.1 X. But if it's a relationship field, again, it's just going to be treated like any other post type. And in general, the best way of dealing with it is via the WordPress, via the pods class. Scott, can we show using WP get object terms how we would use we would get an associated taxonomy? Let's say we have a taxonomy called teams, right? If we're still sticking with hats as our custom post type.
Sure.
So there are a bunch of really cool functions that WordPress gives us. I see a lot of times people do use get terms. Get terms will show us all terms in a taxonomy. Doesn't matter what post they're associated with. Whereas WP get object terms, which is what he's using now, you'll see the first argument there is what post. So that we're going to give it the ID of the current post. So that way, if there are 32 teams, but this current post only is associated with 5 teams, it's only going to give us 5 results. Whereas get terms would give us 32 results no matter what page we're on.
So if we were on an archive page for that taxonomy, you might want to show like a drop-down list of all the teams, and that's when you would use something like get terms.
Get terms, right? And that's going to show us all 32.
Got it.
Whereas in this case, what we're doing is just showing the ones that are associated with the current post.
Perfect.
And so then so the second argument there is what taxonomy? The name of the taxonomy, teams. And then the third argument, which is optional, is what do you want it to return? By default, it returns this really big object that has all the information. And the third argument gives you these additional like an array of arguments. You can look in the codex for that. Yep, Scott just dropped that into Slack. We'll put it into the show notes. But what he's done, which is really useful if you just want to output the names, is you just tell it what I want to return is the names, and then that's going to return an array of names, and then he's just using implode, which is a PHP function that turns an array into strings. In this case, a comma-separated list of names. And now he's showing us the same thing using the Pods API. So Pods display teams is going to give us a big array of all of the terms. But he did have a traversal in there a second ago.
Yeah, so I'm using display method, so that automatically traverses to the index field, which it knows it's a team. Team is related to a taxonomy, so taxonomy's index field is name, but you can also manually do something like that. So you say .name to make sure you specify it, and you can also use that in field to get just all the names out. This gives you an array, whereas display always returns a string.
Right, so that's going to manually do that kind of loop. And sometimes it's helpful to get the array that has all of the information because let's say you wanted to do links to the term link page. You could do a for each loop through all of those terms, right? Like let's for each through teams. For each teams is team, right? We generally do this in PHP. We go from a plural to a singular. And then term ID is in there. And we can use, what is it, get term link, right?
Yeah.
That'll give us the link to the archive page for that taxonomy, and then we could wrap that up in a link like Scott's showing us now, where we use the actual name in there. I'll let Scott finish what he's typing. And he's using sprintf and just to handle the formatting, make it easier. You could do the same thing with a lot of like parentheses, dot, not parentheses, quotes, dot type stuff with echo, or just putting it into a variable.
Yeah, I think
it's really messy though.
The sprintf is the cleanest method that WordPress coding standards recommends. And in here, so I've got the format, which is %s. It's just a simple way to replace strings and stuff. You can also do d for like a digit, like if it's an integer or something, like a number. But in this case, so I'm passing that into the sprintf. I'm getting the term link. And one thing is also important to do is when you're echoing or outputting URLs, to escape the URL whenever you're doing an href attribute. And then I'm stripping all the tags because I don't want any tags, but I do want to support entities. So instead of escaping the HTML, I'm going to go ahead and strip the tags.
Right. And I think that using sprintf makes this slightly more complicated, but it's really worth it in the long term. PHP can get really messy if you don't do it this way. And I'll be honest, like it was a bit of an intellectual hurdle for me when I started getting into doing it this way, but it was worth it. It does become very intuitive. And it really does lead to cleaner code, and right, like this is the alternative. It's these sort of like dots this, dot that. It's so easy to screw up, and you just lost a ton of validation. Right, sprintf can force things to be strings, can force things to be integers, these sorts of things. And we just lost all that. So I really, in general, think the way Scott did it the first time, to take a little bit more work to learn, but once it becomes intuitive, it's really worth it in the long run. Do we have any other final things we want to cover in our last 5 minutes?
There are no questions we haven't hit already, I believe, and there's no new questions on the... Oh, just a nice comment. Bernard said, "Nice work of doing clean code."
And
Yeah,
by the way, just getting back before we go, to Friends of Pods, Bernard said this like, "Oh, I help out with support." There are a lot of ways that you can help us out. Helping out with support, helping us squash a bug, helping us fix. Right, we have a ton of open pull requests that need tested. To go in and say, "Hey, I did this test. This is what I got. I think that's good. I think that's bad. I think maybe we need to adjust this." Writing a Pods plugin, contributing to a Pods plugin, lots of ways that you can help, spreading the word, telling people, hey, I had this common problem in WordPress and I solved it with Pods, or telling people how they can use Pods, how they can support Pods or Friends of Pods, telling them to watch the PodsCast. These are all great ways to help us grow.
yeah, and the Friends of Pod site represents a new shift. We've recently had a new logo, some new branding colors, trying to clean things up and make things more concise. But also, we're going to be redoing the site, our main site, so making it easier to get to what you want to find, better representation of our homepage, all sorts of stuff. But also, like Josh was touching on, it's not all about money. Friends of Pods are great to help us keep going forward as a team, but really on our new site we'll be highlighting a lot of our contributors and giving them props and listing them on our site in a way that is just hopefully a nicer way to say thank you, and also I would say, and it's one of those mixed grab bags. Some people may think money is better or more worth it, but if you have time, putting time and help on support and code, I would say that Friends of Pods is to money as best friends of Pods is to code and time. I think the best of friends can spend time, but friends can send you money or whatever for a birthday gift. But I like this. I like to think of it that way. So really, people like Bernard, we have so many cool people that are just helping us. I have no idea how it's grown to the point where we have like 10 people that are posting in GitHub that I don't know personally, that I've never met in person, are helping out and doing random things, or saying, hey, I've added this feature, I fixed this. That is a huge help to us. So I would love to keep seeing that, but I also don't want to, say that they're less involved or less worthy than our friends of Pods. They are our best friends of Pods.
And if you're a contributor to Pods, then your face is already on that site. I wrote a cool plugin, which is available in WordPress.org called Acknowledge Me, that we use for that. It just shows everybody who's contributed to a repo, and we made that specifically so we can show all your pretty faces there, or whatever your gravatar is. Okay, so I think we're at the end. Final
Yes, we are. Yep, we're at the final end. So our next episode is in 2 weeks on April 21st, 2015, returning at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. UTC. You can always find the archives of our show at our website at http://pods.io/podscast. I really need to create a graphic for this. And also on our YouTube channel. I'm going to include that in the show notes. We want to thank you so much for joining us for our podcast, and we look forward to your questions and comments for the next one in 2 weeks. Thank you so much for coming.